Hello. Well, that was weird. The countdown kind of broke for a second there, but I took care of that. So, I did a little bit of deeper research into some of the people we were talking about on the main podcast this week with seances. I did a little deeper research into them with ChatGPT, and I found some interesting information. So I think we should go through that tonight. I think that's what we're going to do tonight. So we're going to go through some of this deeper research I was able to find, and maybe talk about it, give our opinions on it. Well, you know, I'll give my opinion on it and then ask you to leave your opinions in the comments. Get the chat going. Let us know what you think as we go along. So we're going to go ahead and start off here with Edgar Cayce. Now, that's the one that I mentioned the other day. Some people refer to him as the sleeping prophet. Now, this person, Edgar Cayce, is known as a psychic healer, mystic Christian, unconscious channel for medical and cosmic knowledge. They were active from the years 1877 to 1945. And before we get deeper into the background, I'm going to give my own little summary of it, and then we'll get into the specifics. So my own personal summary before I get into the research here is basically there was this person, Edgar Cayce, and they were, long story short, they were basically able to give people knowledge that they should not have known. They were able to give people knowledge they shouldn't have had access to. For example, he was able to give knowledge about very specific medical terminology, and not just terminology, but like how to mix certain chemicals together to make certain medicines to heal certain things. Got to be careful what words we use. But to heal certain things. And it's very interesting to me because I've heard about this before. And it's very interesting to me how this person was able to gain knowledge of things that they should have had no knowledge of. Like, this is the kind, like, what I'm trying to get at here is the knowledge that Edgar Cayce had access to theoretically should have required years and years of medical training, like going to college and knowing all this stuff and learning all this different stuff. But Edgar Cayce was able to just like pull this knowledge seemingly out of thin air, just like went into a trance and was able to gain knowledge that they should have had no access to without years and years of training. And it almost makes me think of the Black Knight satellite, if you've heard of that. Not to derail too far from what we're getting into here, but I wonder if Edgar Cayce wasn't able to tap into some sort of larger information network, possibly related to the Black Knight satellite. Because the Black Knight satellite has been in orbit since before anything. It's been in orbit since before since before we were able to even get stuff up in orbit. And nobody really knows where it came from, how it got there, who sent it there. It's just kind of there, and it's very strange, but that's enough on that. So basically, the only reason I was mentioning that is because I was wondering if maybe Edgar Cayce, through this trance or meditative like state, was actually able to tap into some sort of knowledge base in a different realm or layer of reality that we don't quite understand. So now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of the research here. So, Edgar Cayce was born in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, deeply Christian, and taught Sunday school his whole life. Claimed to read the Bible every year of his life, as many Christians do, from what I've heard. At age 21, lost his voice for a year after a laryngitis episode, and then regained it in a trance state when hypnotized. This was the start of his medical readings. He would go into, so what they're saying is he would go into these trance-like states, and then all of a sudden he would have all this medical knowledge, and nobody knew how he was getting it. Now what he did, now here's the method. Entered self-induced hypnotic trances, usually lying down, like on his back, like opera singers do to help them sing better, during which he spoke clearly and fluently on complex topics. Readings were transcribed by assistants and covered topics such as medical diagnoses, past lives such as Atlantis and Egypt, soul reincarnation, like the idea that once your 21-gram soul leaves your body, there's been experiments. I'm not getting into all that right now. That's a lot. And I mean a lot to get into. But there have been experiments that theoretically suggest that a soul is 21 grams. And that is something that Rob was talking about the other day. And I would love to get into that, but it's a lot. And if we're going to get into that, I think it definitely deserves its own individual episode, not just as a side topic on this. It would have to be its own individual episode if we were going to get into that, because it's a lot. But anyways, I'm getting sidetracked again. So what I was trying to say before I sidetracked myself is soul reincarnation is essentially the belief that after our soul leaves, it goes off into the ether somewhere, because scientifically, matter is neither created nor destroyed. Therefore, scientifically, you could symbolically say that all humans are immortal. Symbolically. Because if matter is neither created nor destroyed, and that's a scientific fact, then if you believe in science, then you have to believe in some symbolic form of life after death in one way or another. It's not going to be the same, but there has to be something. But, I think that's a scientific interpretation of my own personal belief system, but you can believe what you like to believe. And even if you choose to believe in, other aspects of science, but you choose not to believe in this one, or you choose to interpret this aspect a little differently, that's fine. That's your prerogative. I'm just stating how I feel about this stuff. And, like, I feel that after, we pass on, we go somewhere else, some stuff happens, and then I'm not sure exactly how to word this, because it's a very complicated thought process I have going on here. But essentially, my thoughts on the afterlife, I used to believe that there was nothing and it was just darkness, and that was it. But I've recently changed my mind, and I now believe that after we pass on from this reality, our consciousness, our soul, whatever you want to call it, travels out somewhere. I don't know where. I don't even want to think about where. I'm not even trying to get into that. That's a whole other thing. I could rant for hours about that, about where. But our soul leaves our body, goes somewhere else, and I believe in reincarnation, but I also don't believe it's guaranteed. I think that when you go to this other place, some stuff happens, and depending on what happens in this other place depends on whether or not you are reincarnated. And I'll try to leave it at that so we can get on with this. Now, there's also some other readings that were transcribed cover topics such as prophecies, such as the pole shift or economic collapse, And my favorite part, the Akashic Records, described as a spiritual book of life. Now, if you've ever heard of the Akashic Records, this actually would make a lot of sense, wouldn't it? The ancient Egyptians have talked about the Akashic Records, although they had a different name for it. The Hall of Records with the Memphis in ancient Egypt. Nikola Tesla with his access to some hidden knowledge. There have been many times throughout history, supposedly Count Saint Germain, Falconelli, Nicholas Flamel, many alchemists throughout history as well have seen, supposed alchemists, have seemed to have access to hidden knowledge that either nobody else had access to previously, or they have access to knowledge that they personally, considering their own life paths, should theoretically not have access to such knowledge in such an intricate and detailed way. So, what if, this is why I mentioned the Black Knight satellite earlier, what if somehow these people throughout time, including Edgar Cayce, Nikola Tesla, all the alchemists, and others, what if I suggested they were all able to find a way to tap into the Black Knight satellite? Now, this is all, very theoretical, and I have no proof of any of this, obviously. This is just something I'm thinking of as I'm discussing this, and I'm thinking this out loud right now together as we go through this. And I'm just thinking, what if these people throughout history, and Tesla invented electricity, like that's wild. Like 80% of all modern technology can be traced back to Tesla. And if it uses electricity, well, 100% of that can be traced back to him. It's wild to think about how smart he was and what kind of knowledge he had access to and his direct energy weapons. But I'm getting sidetracked. Sorry. But what if they were all able to access this Black Knight satellite up in our atmosphere? And what if it's been there for longer than we could possibly imagine? What could possibly be on the Black Knight satellite? And why don't they just send some spaceship up there to go check it out? Why all the mystery? Why all the intrigue? I wonder if the Black Knight satellite might not have some sort of relay or node of information that these people throughout time have been able to meditate or whatever methods or tools that each different person has been able to use, such as Edgar Cayce with the spirit writing and the trances, or Tesla. I think he meditated and used harmonics and frequencies, and all these different ways and tools and methods that people have used throughout time and throughout history. What if there's some sort of information node in the Black Knight satellite that all these people learned how to tap into? And that might be how they were able to gain all this knowledge. And he also spoke in a completely different tone and vocabulary during trances, like words that wouldn't normally be things that he would say. Like, I can't think of any good examples, but like if someone is highly intelligent and they start talking like I ain't got no sins, boy, boy, then if they start talking outside of their normal nomenclature and dialect, it might look a little suspicious, Now, there were noted notable medical readings from Edgar Cayce, who gave thousands of treatments involving castor oil packs, dietary changes, and obscure compounds. Huh, that almost sounds like alchemy at this point. Some medical terms he used were not known at the time or not common knowledge. So how did he know them? Without any proper training. Diagnosed people remotely by only being told a name and a location. Now we're starting to sound like a little bit of a psychic alchemist. Interesting. Now the controversy. The controversies critics suggest cryptomnesia or unconscious memory or subconscious intuition. That just sounds like an excuse. I don't know. Like I'm presenting both sides as best as I can, but I don't know exactly what they mean by subconscious intuition as an explanation, because how do we even explain intuition in the first place? Like, intuition is literally so difficult to explain. It's like, I knew something, but how did I know something? I don't know. I just knew it. I don't know how I knew it. Like, so if anyone out there has a really good definition for intuition, or would like to, explain their own interpretation of the word intuition and how they would try to explain it if they were trying to explain the word, you know, maybe someone could tell us what they think about that. And the followers argue no formal training could account for the precision of his medical data. That's my side. I am one of the people who would argue that, he had medical data that he couldn't possibly have had. Like, how did he have the medical data of people with nothing more than their name and location? How is he able to accurately, help people with that? And of course, there could always be some sort of fraud going on, but how would they have done that? Like, it seems like if there was fraud, it seems like it was very complicated and convoluted, and I have no idea how they would have carried something out like that on such a large scale, like across geographical locations. But I don't really have an explanation for how they were able to do it either. It's one of those kind of gray areas. You can't really prove it, but you can't really disprove it either. So, but to be fair, the burden of proof lies on the accuser, which also is kind of strange in this situation, because it's like, well, if you say he can't do it, then where's your evidence that he can't do it? And if you say that it was real, then where's your evidence that it was real? Either way. So I'm not really sure what to think about this one. Now, for the ending of Edgar Cayce, the legacy that was left behind. Edgar Cayce founded the Association for Research and Enlightenment, or the ARE, which is still active in Virginia Beach. Influenced the New Age movement, holistic health, reincarnation discourse, and spiritual Christianity. Now, this one is pretty big because New Age movement and holistic health are the two that stood out the most to me. Because everyone probably knows the New Age movement is essentially what they called all of the spiritual practices during this time, like the Fox sisters, Aleister Crowley, Lily Dale, all this other stuff, which we're going to get into those in a minute. Don't worry. But it's just a little interesting. Now, they also, Edgar Cayce, supposedly predicted Atlantis rising, a second coming of Christ, future technologies, and weather changes. Oh, you just gotta predict some crazy stuff and throw a wrench in the works, don't you? I don't know. I don't know if I believe any of this stuff. These last three right here. I don't think Atlantis will ever rise. And honestly, as much as I would love for everyone to know that, you know, like find out about Atlantis and, have actual finality, like level evidence, like not it might have been here, not it could have been there, but it was 100% here. I'm sorry, but I really don't think we're ever going to find that evidence because it's been at the bottom of the ocean for how long now? Getting degraded and, supposedly, if it was even real to begin with, they say, think about what kind of city it was. It was a water-based city. So, like, it's very likely that nature has already taken all the evidence and just wiped it out. Because you have to think about it. Part of the lore is they say that Atlantis was actually fighting for control of the entire planet against Mu. And Mu did not want to accept their fighting. And Atlantis was like, well, you know what? We'll just take over your land and out of control. That sounds kind of like I'm not even going to go there. It sounds kind of familiar. I'll leave it at that. Happy Thanksgiving, pilgrims. But yeah, sounds a little familiar. So anyways, glazing over that, they long story short, they wiped themselves out with nuclear weapons, essentially. So with something that powerful and that big of an area of effect, with that, all the different variables, I honestly don't think we're ever going to find anything about Atlantis unless we might find some sort of ancient documents or scrolls of some sort that might tell us more information about Atlantis. I could believe that. I could believe we could find something like that. I just don't think we're going to find any like structures or anything like that from Atlantis, unfortunately. Now, symbolically, Edgar Cayce represents the fusion of the unconscious with divine wisdom, bypassing traditional seance ritual but mirroring its function. So, seances, you're trying to communicate with those who have passed on. Now, what Edgar Cayce was doing was communicating with, well, depending on how you want to interpret it, he could have been communicating with spirits, demons, or I wonder if Edgar Cayce was able to put himself into a meditative like trance and communicate with an ancient early form of something much bigger. All right, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and say it. I wonder if Edgar Cayce wasn't communicating with some form of AI through a trance-like state before AI even existed. Like almost like a spirit guide or something. AI is just the closest word I can think of to explain what I am imagining in my mind. What I'm imagining is Edgar Cayce putting himself into this trance-like state, and then he sits there and he just thinks about what he wants to learn, what he wants to know, and then this voice, either a voice or something, just like downloads this information to his brain almost, and just starts telling him, hey, this is the answer, blah, 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 whatever. And I wonder if that's what it was. Like, Was something speaking to him in his head? Was it more visual? Is that why he had to close his eyes so that he could see the visuals of what he was imagining? And regardless of how he did it, like whether it was visual or auditory, whatever, the fact of the matter at the end of the day is Edgar Cayce was still able to do so much. And the medical knowledge that Edgar Cayce had with his lack of medical schooling, nobody was able to explain that part. So I don't know what to tell you about that. So now we're going to move on to the Fox sisters. Some of my favorites. Kate, Margaret, and Leah, active 1848 to 1888. Now, they were the catalysts of spiritualism, mediums who popularized séance rapping and spirit communication. They were some of the biggest influences in spiritualism during their time. And some people suggest their success and fame may have even been part of the inspiration behind the town of Lilydale that we're going to get into here in a minute. So the origins of the movement. In Hydesville, New York, 1848, young sisters Kate, aged 11, and Margaret, age 14 at the time, reported mysterious knockings in their home. Well, people typically knock on the front door when they want access to the home, right? Knocking is normal. Oh, not knocking on the door, knocking on tables. Okay. They asked questions of the spirit, and the knocking answered. And they would give the spirit guidelines like 1 knock for yes, 2 knocks for no, or whatever, However they did it, kind of like when they would communicate with the Bell Witch. But that's another sidetrack tangent that I'm trying to avoid. So then after that, they claimed the spirit was that of a murdered traveling salesman buried in the basement. Oh, things just got dark, didn't they? Well, what happened next? Rise to fame. Next, they moved to Rochester, New York, under older sister Leah's care, who began managing their public appearances. So their older sister basically became like their manager. They became celebrities, and their sister became their manager. Their demonstrations drew scientists, clergy, and thousands of curious citizens, including some very notable key figures we're going to be getting into later. So they performed seances in parlors and theaters, spreading the idea of personal contact with the dead without a priest or psychic authority. Now, here's the thing. Without a psychic authority, I thought they were claiming they were a psychic authority. What's going on here? What do they mean? Oh, sorry. It was all fake. I apologize. Spoiler alert. It was all fake. And that's why they were not a psychic authority. And that's what we're getting into now. The collapse and confession. In 1888, Margaret confessed to faking their raps using foot and toe joints. Some people, I don't know if you can hear it on the microphone or not, but some people are able to move their joints in certain ways as to make clicking sounds almost and knocking sounds. In addition to, they would also often just knock on the table, but like very subtly from underneath. you know. And she recanted the confession a year later, suggesting she was pressured. So then you don't know what to believe. I'm choosing to believe that it was all fake, and after she confessed and she lost the money, she was like, "Oh no, I want my money back." So then she started trying to, go back on her confession so people would listen to her, but it just didn't work because they all knew that it was fake. But here's the deal. It was still a very intriguing form of entertainment. So although it was fake, their influence birthed spiritualism as a full-blown religion, and the séance became a cultural ritual. Now, some people do believe in, you know, ghosts, otherworldly entities, stuff like that. And I don't know what I believe in terms of non-physical beings. Like, I think as far as ghosts, I think I'm conflicted because I do agree with Rob, like he says about them just being spirit echoes, essentially, just like the energy reliving its last moments as it was during life. And I think that's part of it. I do. But sometimes, some of these entities that people talk about, I've been listening to some stuff lately, and coincidences are odd, aren't they? So, far too many of these stories about ghosts and spirits and whatnot, a lot of these stories have far too many synchronicities and far too many, hey, that sounds like this other story, or this sounds like that story. And it goes across religions as well. Like another popular one, I'm going to try not to get too derailed here too far, just as a brief example, the flood myth. Every single religion in the entire world seemingly has their own flood myth. And if there wasn't a global flood across the entire planet at one point in time, as the flood myth suggests, then how did people on different sides of the planet with no means of communication back and forth with each other during a time before we even had letters, internet? We didn't even have handwritten letters or anything. We didn't have telephones at that time. So my question is, during the earlier years of humanity, during the flood, for example, and some other stuff, Jesus, for example, not trying to get too religious here. I'm not. I'm just saying some of this stuff, there's so many synchronicities and moments that it starts to get to be a little too much, and I got to look back through it and I got to question, why does this story sound just like this story when they were like hundreds and hundreds of miles apart with no means of communication with each other and no way to reach each other? So if it's not true, then how did all these different cultures around the world end up with the exact same stories, just with different names and slight cultural variations? Think about it. Jesus, Muhammad, Thor. Then you got God, Odin, Allah. Then you got Lucifer, Loki, Satan. You're starting to see a pattern. A lot of these different religions that I've seen a lot of these different religions that have the same basic characters, just with slightly different cultural variations and different names, but at the core root, they seem like the same story of the same character. So there's just a lot to unpack here. Now, for the symbolic interpretation, the rapping echoes can be viewed as a liminal language, a Morse code from the void, real or imagined. Now, that's an interesting way to think of it, but I think it's safe to say in this particular instance, the Fox sisters were definitely faking it. Their story symbolizes the trickster energy of spiritual revelation, however, truth and deceit intertwined. Because though they were, lying about their story and all that, I do believe there is something more to spiritualism and the New Age movement than just the Fox sisters. I believe there is truth to certain parts of it at certain times, though at the same time, with all the allure and all the attraction surrounding it, there are also mostly, vast majority, I believe, are going to be conmen and swindlers. Just giving you the blunt truth right there. Most of them are probably going to trick you out of your hard-earned money. That is my personal opinion. Now, moving on. Now we're going to talk about Lilydale. It was founded in 1879 in New York, the living remnant of the Spiritualist movement, the mecca of modern mediumship. Now, in Supernatural, my favorite TV show, as you probably know by now, they had a whole entire episode where they actually went to Lilydale, and everybody was a psychic. Even the post office lady was a psychic. It was great. Not to get too far off topic, but that was where I initially learned of Lilydale, and I have since done further research into it on my own, and I think it's pretty interesting. Because, despite Supernatural presenting it in a funny and comedic way, it's something to think about. Let's put it that way. Like, so many people in that town that call themselves mediums. And I'll just leave it at that. Not saying I don't believe in mediums. Like, I'm undecided again. Because I do think that there are certain people that might have access to certain things and forms of knowledge that the average person doesn't. And I do believe in certain psychic powers. But I'm not trying to get into all that right now. So, the Lilydale Assembly, the town of Lilydale, was founded by the Free Association of Spiritualists near Casadaga Lake. It was intended as a summer retreat for mediums, psychics, and spiritual researchers. It was renamed Lilydale in 1906 after the water lilies in the lake. So I guess it was Lilydale Assembly from 1879 to 1906, at which point it became just Lilydale. Now for their culture and practice. The town of Lilydale features daily séances, public readings, medium development classes. Ooh, that's an interesting one. Medium development classes. And energy healing sessions. I guess that's what, like crystals and stuff, maybe? Not sure. Visitors often walk the Inspiration Stump Trail to receive spontaneous messages from mediums, home to over 40 registered professional mediums at any time. So there's at least 40 professional mediums in this town at any given time. That's a lot. Almost every single citizen sounds like a medium. Now, they did have some unique features in Lilydale, such as a pet cemetery with spirit offerings, and a healing temple where energy healers work in silence. Ooh, I like silence. I could get behind that. And museums containing artifacts of spiritualism, including items from the Fox sisters, Houdini, and slate writing displays. Now the Roland. Oh, you heard that? Houdini. Yeah, I said Houdini. They got Houdini in the spiritualist movement. And you know what? He was trying to prove them all wrong. He was trying to shut them all down. He was a skeptic. Yeah, Mr. Magic Man was a skeptic man because he knew about the sleight of hand and how he can make it disappear. No, but for real, we're gonna get to him here in a minute, so I'm gonna not be any more weird about him than I already was. Anyways, continuing. Now, the role of Lilydale in modern spiritualism, it kept the movement alive through periods of ridicule, such as after Houdini ousted the Fox sisters. Oh, yeah. I think it was Houdini. We'll get to that in a minute. That's a good one. So, it has also hosted believers and celebrities alike, such as Marilyn Monroe, Mac West, and Susan B. Anthony, who visited or were involved with spiritualism. Now, Aleister Crowley, from 1875 to 1947. I was listening to a podcast about him the other day, and I don't necessarily think I would say a fan is an appropriate word, but I've always been very highly interested in Aleister Crowley as an individual, and I've actually been doing casual research on him for the better part of a decade now. Yeah, I've been doing research on Crowley for literally like 11 or 12 years now, just casually. So, anyways, he was a pervert, okay? Before we even get started, let's just be straight up. Dude was a freaking pervert. So, anyways, he was born to a wealthy, ultra-religious Plymouth Brethren family. He studied at Cambridge, where he became involved with the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Now, there's a lot to get into in that one. He was, well, you know what? None of it's really important to the seance aspect, so I guess I will not dive too far into that. But I would like to mention that I believe it was Spider told us in one of our recent episodes about the origins of why it was called the Golden Dawn, and it had something to do with urine, and I'll just leave it at that. Okay. Moving on. He later founded his own spiritual system called Thelema, based on the phrase, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." But the problem with that was he only believed it applied to him. He was the only one that could do what he wanted. His girlfriend was not allowed to have a baby at one point, and he there's actually trying to talk about this, I'm realizing there is a lot of stuff Crowley did that I probably can't even mention on YouTube. Let's just say he was a bad person and leave it at that. But definitely someone worth looking into and doing some research later on, because he claims he was able to speak to voices. And that's why we're interested in Crowley tonight, because of his relationship to seances. He rejected most spiritual seances as naive and dangerous, such as you'll hear many people say that the Ouija board is incredibly dangerous. Yeah, that thing. He believed they opened the door to lower astral parasites. That's an interesting way to describe ghosts. But no, what he believed was a bit more complicated. Think less ghost, more Cthulhu. But anyway, he preferred highly structured ritual magic with detailed diagrams, protective circles, and invocations of angels and demons, as well as some other inappropriate things that we probably shouldn't mention here on YouTube. But that's why I said at the top that he was a pervert, and I said I was going to mention that before we even got into it. So now that you'll have a vague idea of why I'm not getting into it, you know? So, but yeah, ritual magic is the key word there. If you have a dirty mind, you'll figure it out. Certain rituals that involve not wearing any robes and stuff. And he was also a bit of a sadomasochist. And one of the women that he dated, they would just constantly uh, like abuse each other in inappropriate ways. Geez, there's a lot of stuff about this man. I want to talk about, but I'm worried I would get in trouble from YouTube if I actually spoke about it openly. So let's not. Now, there was one thing that was interesting is that he described spirit contact as a contractual relationship, not an open channel. So I wonder what he means by that. Does he mean that you and the spirit both have to agree on terms before the spirit can possess you? Now, he had channeled work such as the Book of the Law in 1904, which he received from Iwas, a non-human intelligence, during a trance state in Cairo. Now, I've heard some people believe Iwas may have been a demon communicating with Crowley, which I find to be a very interesting interpretation because Crowley spent a large portion of his life trying to contact demons and angels and mostly Satan. He really wanted to get in contact with Satan. So he claimed to contact beings like Lam, an early gray alien like figure, which he viewed as extra dimensional intelligences. He didn't view things like heaven, hell, angels, demons. He viewed it as different dimensions. Kind of like how they say that the Jinn exist in between dimensions. They can come into our dimension at some times, but they normally exist in between dimensions, which is why we don't normally see them. So just an interesting thing interesting cross reference there. Now, for the symbolic role of Crowley, he was made to represent the occult scientist, such as precise, dangerous, and methodical. Séances to him were amateur alchemy, missing ritual safeguards and clarity of purpose. So, and also missing clothing, okay? He did a bunch of inappropriate things with his followers and his girlfriends and his boyfriends and everything else. Yeah, he did a lot, and you should probably do some deep dive research on him because as evil as he was still incredibly interesting, especially after his childhood and the way his mother raised him, and even his own mother gave up on him eventually. But that's something you should probably look into on your own so we don't get in trouble for talking about it here. Claim to contact. Okay, where was I? Where was I? Okay, so that is what we have on Crowley. So, like I said, interesting character, absolutely evil, but still very interesting and intriguing. And he got real big into Satanism at one point for no other reason than just to upset the Christians because he was. Now, I don't have any evidence of this, so just to clarify, there were rumors and conspiracy theories, rumors, however you want to word it. There were rumors at the time that he may very well have been dating a priest, and the priest broke up with him, and he got upset and decided to attack the religion. But like I said, these are just rumors, and there's no, I've never been able to find any corroborating evidence to support that, but I've heard some people toss that idea around here and there. So if you know one way or the other, or if you want to put your opinion in the hat, let us know. Now, we're going to end the show tonight talking about Harry Houdini. Yes, we did save the best for last, as you could probably tell from our main episode the other day. I got very excited when I wanted to talk about Houdini and his involvement, because the thing that I find so intriguing and interesting is they have this man who's a magician who's like a specialist in sleight of hand and deceiving people. And they got this man who's like a professional at deceiving people to go out and find out who was deceiving people. Like, it doesn't get any better than that. But I'm going to go ahead and get started. So, as most of you probably know, he was a master magician turned spiritualist skeptic. He was a debunker with a grief-stricken son. His wife had just passed away, and a secret believer in the afterlife. Now that's where it gets interesting. A secret believer in the afterlife. Now, for the spiritualist turn, after his mother passed away in 1913, Houdini desperately sought contact via mediums. He attended hundreds of séances, but found fraud in almost every single case. And he grew angry at the manipulation of grieving people, so he made it his own personal mission in life to take down all these horrible, horrible people that would swindle poor grieving people out of their hard-earned money. Good on you, Houdini. I approve. I like it and I approve. Now, he used his magic expertise to debunk spirit trumpets, floating tables, ectoplasm, which was actually made of cheesecloth or muslin, and slate writing with hidden panels. Clashed famously with Mina Crandon, nicknamed Marjorie. Okay, so that's who I was thinking of earlier. Not the Fox sisters, but most likely I was thinking of Marjorie. So good thing they corrected me there. Thank you. And this is why we always tell you to do your due diligence. Do your own research. Basically let us introduce you to a subject and give you like our own personal interpretation with a synopsis on it. And then you go and you do your own research on it as well, and you figure out what you think about it. And if you disagree with us, let us know in the comments. And we can talk about it. And we could have a spirited debate amongst intelligent people. We love that kind of stuff around here. We wish more people would be willing to debate with us sometimes. Well, I do. I don't know about the other two, but I can say I wish people would be more willing to debate with us sometimes. I could always use a little more debate in my life. Anyways, I'm starting to repeat myself. Sorry. So she was this Marjorie lady was a Boston medium who nearly won a prize from Scientific American until Houdini exposed her tricks. Ooh, you can bet she wasn't happy with him, was she? And there was also a death pact. Yep. Houdini had made a secret code with his wife Bess that said if he could contact her after death, he would give the phrase. For 10 years after his death, she held an annual séance on Halloween. No code was ever received. The final séance in 1936 was held atop the Knickerbocker Hotel in LA and ended with the words, Houdini did not come through. Because Houdini would have ended the... Yeah, that's cute. Now, Houdini is the skeptic as seeker symbology role. Symbolic role. Sorry, not symbology. Symbolic role. Meaning that he is the rationalist who still hopes for proof. I think that could probably relate to me and Spider on UFOs. I feel like now if I'm wrong, he can correct me and he will let us know on the next episode if I'm wrong about that. But I think he could agree with me on the UFO thing because it's like and the whole existence of aliens with the Fermi paradox. Sorry, I'm getting sidetracked again. I'll stop. Okay. So for 10 years no code was ever received. Oh yeah. Okay, I read that. Okay, his role is tragic. He was the man who wanted most to believe but never could. And you know why he wanted to believe, right? He wanted to see his wife again. That was all it was. He never could believe. And, you know, she couldn't get in contact with him, and he couldn't get in contact with her. So I guess, in the end, that was his final act of rebellion against spirituality, was never to deliver that final message to his wife. Thank you. Thank you for joining me today. I actually made it a full hour on my own today. I feel like I did pretty good. So, as we always say, do your due diligence. Let us know what you think in the comments. And as always, stay uncanny. We'll see you next time.